Hi there, and thank you for joining me for this talk on how to empower yourself in the face of narcissistic fog. And what is narcissistic fog? Well, the three letters stand for fear, obligation, and guilt. And these are some of the ways that the narcissist will use to manipulate you, confuse you, increase your anxiety, make you easier to control, and help them to get what they want. The first one, fear. Now, this usually originates in childhood, and this fear can arise even when you're an adult. You fear making your mother unhappy, or you fear your mother being displeased with you. And this originated in childhood because when you were a child and you were totally dependent on your mother, your primary caregiver for both your emotional and your physical needs, having her reject you or abandon you would have felt life-threatening. And indeed, it was life-threatening because when you have no access to resources, which you don't as a child, you can't feed and clothe yourself. You can't even remove yourself from the situation. You really are trapped. So if that person that you are so dependent on is saying that they're not there for you, whether they say it in those words or indirectly through their rejection, their anger, and so on, your nervous system is going to go into a fight or flight, into a feeling of, I'm going to die. They talk about the fawn response, which is when you start people pleasing to try and get someone to be happy with you again. That started with your mother and continues into adulthood. And so, this fear response, your mother uses that to keep you in line, to keep her getting what she wants, which is the supply from you. And by now, you probably know what supply is. It's the fuel that keeps the narcissist going, which is very different from the fuel that keeps a normal person going. So, normal people like you and me, even though you might not feel normal because you're not healed yet, you are compared to a narcissist because your desires are for human connection and, appropriate levels of intimacy and emotional honesty and authenticity and all those good things. That's what most normal people want. But a narcissist does not want that at all. They want power and control. They want to win. A lot of them get a kick out of seeing you feel bad. So that reaction they get out of you, making you feel bad, makes them feel powerful. It makes them feel effective. And so they actually get some enjoyment out of that. And that's why if you're trying to understand your mother, if your mother is a narcissist, if you're trying to understand her from your mindset, that's a bit of projection that really isn't helpful. So, projection is when we kind of put our qualities onto another person. And normally it's because we don't want to look at them. But in this case, it's you projecting your honest motivations, your pure, for lack of another word, desires onto your mother and assuming that because you feel that way, other people are going to feel that way too. And actually, your mother's coming from a very, very different place. So, just as an aside, if you're trying to understand your mother from your mindset, you've got to let that go because, in fact, you probably will never really get your mother except as from a very far distance in a more clinical way, as someone who has some level of narcissistic personality disorder. That's the only way you'll understand her. It's not going to be on a level where you'll be able to connect. So there's that. But the fear is this nervous system response. And it's important to say that sometimes the fear is real. Like, for example, your mother might be engaging in a smear campaign. Your mother might actually have a propensity for violence. So even if she never has been violent in the past, she might become so if, for instance, you try to pull away from her, or if you're very enmeshed and you decide that you want to individuate, she might become, you know, more intense than you might have expected. So it could look like stalking. She might start showing up at your place of work or at your home uninvited. There are cases where, they send the police over for a quote unquote wellness check. That's something that's been threatened to me because I wasn't responding. So these are real fears that we might have. I should say that you don't really need to fear a wellness check because all you have to tell them is that you're fine. And so it's not really as scary as we think it is, but we really blow these things up in our minds because we've given our mother so much power and we feel like that little child, even though we're now an adult who does have access to resources, who will not die if anybody, including our mother, rejects us because we can take care of ourselves. We still have that feeling inside if our mother's not happy with us that I've got to make this right. And making it right usually means me sucking it up, crawling back, pretending that I was wrong, perhaps apologizing for something I didn't do, and and that's the way you smooth things over until the next time it happens. So this fear of just her not being happy with you, and then besides the smear campaign, the real fear could also be that she is trying to sabotage you in some way. So, for instance, your career, if you're like me and you have an online business that's predominantly online, your mother could do what mine did and go into the comments on your blog and try to smear your name in front of your audience. And that is one thing that happened to me and made me see how important it was to get really diligent about protecting myself against her. Because now it wasn't only my heart, which is extremely important. Now it was also my livelihood. So I had to admit to myself that my mother would destroy me to clear her own name. And that's something I had to face, which is not an easy thing to admit. And so now, of course, I've got her. Not only am I no contact, I have her blocked on every channel. And if I ever see her name pop up, which once in a blue moon it will, I make sure and she has no access to me in any way. And so that is something, that's a reason why we have to bring our adult out to face the truth of what's going on. Because if we allow the child to continue running the show and believing that, oh, maybe I can make things right with mom, maybe if I just appease her, I'll be okay because of that fear. You could be putting yourself in real danger, whether it's physical, emotional, or financial. Your reputation could be at stake, for example. So some of these are real fears. Others are nervous system fears that we can use tools such as, learning how to soothe your nervous system when you do feel these fears come up, doing that inner child healing to bring your competent adult out and put her in the driver's seat instead of having the child driving the car. The child can still be in the back seat like children are, but it can't be running the show. It can't be the one who's making your decisions and so on, because we really do have to be honest about what we're facing with our mother. So the fears can be real. They're all real, but they can be well-founded, such as the smear campaign, the potential for violence, the potential to ruin your livelihood and your reputation, or they can be unfounded or healable, let's say, with the nervous system response. So that's fear. And the next one is obligation. That's O. And the obligation is what we feel toward our mother simply because she gave birth to us. And she really helps us to feel that because that's what she wants. But the truth is that you don't owe your mother anything, and none of us owe our parents anything for doing their obligation of raising us. And so you might have been led to believe that, even by society, that she's your mother. no matter what happens, she'll always be your mother. You have to take care of her when she's old, you have to be there for her. You have to make the call on Mother's Day. What kind of a daughter would you be if you didn't do those things? But in fact, you have probably lived a life of obligation toward your mother, and it's not normal, really, for a daughter to only spend time with her mother out of obligation. That's your normal, perhaps, but that's not the way it's supposed to be. My daughters and a lot of other mothers, they spend time with us because they want to. And in fact, when someone says to me, "Oh, we have a great relationship," I talk to my daughter every day. That's not necessarily ideal. If your daughter, or if you're the daughter and you're having daily communication as an adult with your mother, you want to ask yourself if that's necessarily healthy, because that sounds a lot like enmeshment. And of course, everything is on a case by case basis, but chances are, if an adult daughter is having daily communication with a mother, there is likely some enmeshment there. There is likely some obligation there. So whether you are on the giving or receiving end of that or both, whether you're the mother, the daughter, or both, I would really examine whether there is some obligation. Does your daughter feel like she has to be in touch with you every day, or you're going to be disappointed with her, or maybe reject her or cause trouble for her, and so on? And then, of course, as the daughter of the narcissistic mother, are you doing that? Are you, constantly answering her calls right away, talking on the phone with her for an hour every day or whatever it is, because you feel like you have to, and you feel like if you don't, that it's not worth the trouble? So you're really abandoning yourself to take care of your mother's needs, which is something you've been doing all your life. Obligation is a form of parentification because you're being forced to take care of your mother's emotional needs while abandoning your own. And this has been going on since you were a little child. And when you were a little child, you didn't have a choice. You had to do that. And in fact, you can thank that inner child for taking care of you that way, for knowing, being smart enough to see, like, I'm in this situation where I'm dependent on this person. I got to keep her happy, and that means I got to tiptoe around her. I got to make sure she's okay with me. This is how I survive. So that was smart. But now that you're an adult, that is no longer the case, and you actually don't need that woman to survive at all. And so all it takes is the courage to change the dynamic and to say, these are my boundaries. This is how often I'm going to talk to you. This is how many days it's going to take me to reply to you. If it comes to that, yes, you can wait days. And so the obligation, that is the next tool that the narcissistic mother uses. And the G in fog is guilt. And this is the thing that you feel anytime you stand up for yourself, anytime you set even the smallest boundary with your mother, you are likely going to feel a lot of guilt. And this guilt might be so overwhelming that it actually forces you to stop doing the thing that is causing the guilt. So, for instance, if you've set a boundary, no contact perhaps, or change in the contact, and the guilt comes on. You don't know what to do with it. It is flooding you. And so instead of allowing the guilt to process because you don't know how to do that, you will do whatever it takes to get rid of the guilt. And that means letting the boundary go, calling your mother, or doing whatever it is you said you wouldn't do. And so you get this short-term relief. And again, this is the inner child at work. The inner child gives you short-term relief from your pain because the pain of the guilt is overwhelming, and by doing something that hurts you in the long run. And anytime you do anything like that, whether it's an addiction, letting down a boundary, anything that gives you quick, short-term relief from the emotional pain you're in, but causes you long-term grief or damage, that's the inner child. So you want to bring the adult out again, and this takes inner child healing because the adult is going to do things such as managing your guilt. So acknowledging that Yes, I feel guilty, but that doesn't necessarily mean I am guilty, and that's a big false belief that's out there in the self-help world. And I've often referred to Brene Brown, whom I disagree with on this, who says that guilt is good because it's a sign that you have compromised yourself and your values and you have done something wrong that you need to atone for. That may be true for some people who are not victims of narcissistic abuse, but for those of us who grew up with a narcissistic mother, guilt is a tool that is used against us. It is a conditioned response to taking care of ourselves because our mothers did not want us taking care of ourselves. They wanted us catering to them, especially their emotional needs, which, as we know, are not pure, are not normal, are not good. Her needs are nefarious, and we were expected to cater to those. Some might even say they were evil. And so this guilt is actually not telling you the truth. It's telling you you've done something wrong when you haven't. And instead of a normal, healthy mother who would try to assuage your guilt, a healthy, normal mother does not want her daughter to feel guilty for displeasing her. I certainly don't want my children to feel guilty. I would rather let them know that it's okay to disagree with me. It's okay to have your boundaries. Let's talk about it. What's happened that we are maybe not agreeing on something, or you're feeling like I'm behaving in a way that's hurtful to you. Let's discuss it. Of course, a narcissistic mother is not going to do that. She's just going to allow the guilt to fester. She's going to encourage the guilt. She's going to use it to the utmost to get what she wants, which is control over you, which is power over you, which is to win against you. Even though you don't know you're in a game here, she is, and she always wants to win. And winning to her looks like you dropping your boundary. It looks like you giving into the guilt and saying yes to whatever she wanted instead of saying no, which would be a yes to yourself. So that's what guilt is doing. It's very important to know that your guilt is not like somebody else's guilt who did not grow up in a narcissistic home. Yours, it does feel overwhelming and it doesn't match the crime, so to speak, because there is no crime. You've done nothing wrong. All you've done is set the boundary, and just standing up for yourself in this way makes you feel terrible because this is how you've been conditioned to feel in the home that you grew up in. And those childhood years, many say those years from 0 to 7, it's almost like a hypnotic trance, the conditioning. It's like cult-like conditioning that really makes you who you are and really embeds the beliefs in you. I am bad if I don't do what my mother wants. And of course, we can train ourselves out of those, but it is like a cult level programming that this guilt is reflecting. So, one of the best ways to move through this overwhelming guilt while maintaining your boundary, forget the scripts. Forget the self-help strategies on how to set boundaries, just say no and so on. You need to manage the guilt that goes along with that, and that is in your body. It's not out of your mouth, it's not in your head, it's in your body. And so the best way I've found to manage guilt from these type of things is to do EFT tapping. That's emotional freedom technique where you tap through meridians in your body. They are here, 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 under the arm, top of the head, and some people do here. And so as you tap through these meridians, and you can find many demonstrations on YouTube. Brad Yates is one of my favorites for this. And you can tap through your emotions, any of your very intense emotions, but we're using guilt in this example. And as you tell yourself how you feel and why, it's really not more than that. You say, I feel so guilty because I set this boundary with my mother as you are tapping. And you can say, even though I feel so guilty, I still love and accept myself. If that feels true for you. If not, you would say something else that feels true for you. But I encourage you to go look at a demonstration and you can learn how to do this for yourself. They've done a lot of research on it. There is no harm that can come to you by doing this. So it's a risk-free way to soothe that nervous system. When you start a round of tapping, you can sort of name how intense your emotion is on a scale of 1 to 10. And then after a couple of rounds of tapping through the emotion, you can ask yourself again. And most, like 90% of the time, that number is going to come down. And you're going to realize that I can actually live with guilt. It doesn't feel good, but I know where it comes from. I know why I'm feeling it. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. And how else can you navigate through this fog or fear, obligation, and guilt that is used against you? And that can feel so convincing and so overwhelming and really make you drop your boundaries and do whatever your mother wants. Well, one way that I've already mentioned is to comfort that child inside of you. So remember that inner child is the one who is really just trying to keep you safe and protected with all these short-term strategies, such as dropping the boundaries, abandoning yourself, and so on to make other people happy. Because as a child, that did keep you safe. And so that child is still operating inside you, even though your reality now is very different. So rejection is not going to kill you anymore. You have access to resources that you didn't have in the past. So helping that inner child understand that so it can take a back seat is really going to help you overcome these tactics that your mother uses. Because when your adult is out driving the car, so to speak, and taking care of you in adult ways instead of unhealed child ways, things are going to look very different. And that fear that you felt if your mother was unhappy with you is going to dissipate. That obligation you felt toward her, you're going to understand that your first obligation is to yourself and that abandoning yourself to try and cater to your mother's needs, which are unbelievably unhealthy, by the way. So it's not even like a positive sacrifice like you would for your children, for example. It's a sacrifice you're making in the name of something that could frankly be evil. So you are abandoning yourself to allow someone with very, very toxic needs to get those needs met. So it's not only hurting you, it's doing no good whatsoever. So if you can start to be honest about these things, that your mother sees the world in a very different way than you or any other healthy or normal person, and that you catering to those needs is really not only hurting you, but hurting the world because it's allowing this dynamic to continue. And narcissists hurt people. That is what they do. They cause inevitable harm to the people that come in contact with them, and you're allowing that to continue if you enable it. And finally, regardless of the level of narcissism, so your mother might be full-blown personality disorder, or she just might have some toxic narcissistic traits that are making your life incredibly difficult. It's hard to heal when you're continuing to be in contact with someone like this. So it is always your right to decide who you want to have contact with, and that is across the board. That might surprise you, but besides children who are in your care, you do not have to be in contact with anyone else that you don't want to be. And of course, exceptions are at work, you have to talk to your boss, all those kind of things. But in relationships, you get to decide. And so it is possible to go no contact with your mother, and you don't have to decide now if that is forever. It could be for a time so that you can do your healing with the peace that you need, because it might feel like if you stay in relationship with your mother while you're trying to heal, it can feel like moving a boulder up a hill. Whereas if you take that space for yourself, say you decide to take 6 months or a year or whatever it is to just have that time and space to heal, knowing that she's not going to understand. And that is just what you've decided for yourself, what you need to do. And then you can reassess whenever you want. or you might choose to change the level of contact. Maybe you do want to stop having those daily conversations. Maybe you want to stop responding right away every time she texts you. Maybe you want to put boundaries around the level of care. If you have finances, maybe you can hire a nurse to help instead of doing all the work yourself. Stop responding to her catty remarks. Don't let her insinuation that you're not doing enough be the catalyst to do more. That's not the work. The work is not to try and do enough to make yourself good enough in her eyes. That's never going to happen. She just likes saying jump and watching you say how high. The work is in understanding that she's going to make these remarks, and my job is not necessarily to ignore them, but to process the feelings that come up when she says them, to practice non-reaction and emotional detachment, and to know that I can take care of those feelings after I leave, but I am not going to give in to them in front of her because that's exactly what she wants. And that's just going to keep this cycle of disempowerment going. So, those are a few ways you can empower yourself in the face of these narcissistic fog tactics. I hope this talk has been helpful to you. I would love for you to subscribe if you find the content helpful. Help us get it out to as many people as possible. We are reaching a lot of new people and bringing them into our community, which I am so, so grateful for. People, women, daughters really need to hear this and feel that they're not alone and know that you are empowered to have the life that you want. I'm so passionate about you understanding that and learning how to do that. That's what I'm here for. So if it resonates, please subscribe, and I will look forward to talking to you next week.